"This is outrageous. You can't block an official escort for a fallen soldier," the airport security supervisor barked, stepping aggressively between Staff Sergeant Michael Winters and the flag-draped transfer case he was escorting. "Military or not, you need proper documentation to access this area." Winters, a member of the elite Tomb Guard regiment, felt his jaw tighten as the supervisor physically prevented him from continuing through the terminal with his sacred cargo. Then, something extraordinary happened that brought the entire bustling airport to a complete standstill. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Staff Sergeant Michael Winters stood ramrod straight, his impeccably pressed dress blues contrasting sharply with the casual attire of travelers rushing through Reagan National Airport. At 32, Winters carried himself with the disciplined bearing that came from years serving as a sentinel at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, one of the military's most prestigious and demanding posts. His face, weathered slightly from countless hours, standing guard in all weather conditions, remained composed despite the growing tension around him. Today's mission differed from his usual duties. He wasn't standing his silent vigil at Arlington National Cemetery. Instead, he had been selected for an equally sacred responsibility, escorting the remains of Private First Class Jessica Morales back to her hometown of Clearwater, Nebraska. PFC Morales, just 23 years old, had been killed by an improvised explosive device while on patrol in a remote mountain province, becoming the first female soldier from her small farming community to die in combat. The weight of this duty pressed heavily on Winters' shoulders. He had never personally known Morales, but after years honoring the unknown soldiers, he understood profoundly what it meant to treat fallen warriors with utmost dignity. The military had strict protocols for such escorts, and Winters had been meticulously briefed on every aspect of his responsibility. The transfer case, draped with the American flag, was to remain within his sight at all times until delivery to the family. "Sir, I have my military orders and escort documentation right here," Winters said calmly, reaching slowly into his breast pocket to retrieve the folded papers. His voice remained measured, though internally he felt a rising frustration at the unnecessary obstacle before him. "I'm on official duty escorting a fallen soldier home to her family." The airport security supervisor, Bernard Keller, had worked at Reagan National for 15 years. His navy blue uniform with gold epaulets gave him an air of authority that he wielded like a shield, balding, and with a perpetual scowl that had deepened over years of dealing with entitled travelers. Keller had developed a reputation among staff for his inflexible adherence to rules, often at the expense of common sense. "I don't care about your papers," Keller snapped, barely glancing at the documentation Winters offered. "This is a secure area. You need specific airport clearance, which you don't have. This isn't some military base where you can just march around wherever you please." Travelers nearby began to notice the confrontation, some slowing their hurried pace to observe the unusual sight of a uniformed tomb guard being blocked while escorting what was clearly a flag-draped casket on a special transport gurney. A small crowd began to gather, their expressions shifting from curiosity to concern. "Mr. Keller," Winters said, noting the name tag on the supervisor's chest, "I've already cleared this with your airline partner and military liaison office. If you'll just review these orders—" "Look, soldier," Keller interrupted, his voice rising, "I've got a terminal to secure. Either you go back and get proper airport escort credentials, or you'll have to wait here while I call my supervisor. Your choice." Winters felt his jaw muscle twitch, the only outward sign of his growing frustration. In his 6 years as a tomb guard, he had perfected the art of emotional control. The Sentinels were famous for their discipline, standing motionless for hours, regardless of weather or circumstance. That same discipline now prevented him from reacting to Keller's dismissive attitude. "Sir, with all due respect, I cannot leave PFC Morales," Winters replied, his tone firm but professional. "My orders are explicit. I am to maintain continuous custody until transfer to the family. I'm not asking for special treatment, but I am requesting professional courtesy for a fallen soldier returning home." Behind Winters stood Airman First Class Sofia Rodriguez, a young Air Force transport specialist who had been assigned to assist with the transfer. Her dark eyes widened at Keller's obstruction, clearly uncomfortable with the disrespect being shown to both the escort and, by extension, to PFC Morales. "Mr. Keller," Rodriguez interjected, stepping forward with her clipboard, "I have the transfer manifests here with all the appropriate signatures, including from your station chief. We processed everything according to protocol." Keller barely acknowledged her, keeping his focus locked on Winters. "Not my problem if someone down the line made a mistake. Rules are rules. This area requires special access credentials that neither of you have presented." The confrontation was occurring in a connecting corridor between terminals, a bottleneck where travelers regularly converged from multiple directions. As the argument continued, the crowd of onlookers grew. Among them was Diane Whitaker, a middle-aged elementary school teacher from Oregon, who had stopped when she noticed the flag-draped transfer case. "Excuse me," she said, approaching cautiously, "but is that one of our soldiers coming home?" Her voice caught slightly on the last words. Before Winters could respond, Keller turned to her with visible irritation. "Ma'am, please, step back. This is an official matter." Diane's expression hardened. "I just wanted to pay my respects. My son served 2 tours overseas. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us." Now back to the story. "Well, you can pay respects somewhere else," Keller replied dismissively. "This area needs to be cleared." This interaction caught the attention of more travelers, including James Harrington, a retired Marine Corps colonel who had been walking past. Harrington, still fit and imposing despite his 65 years, observed the scene with growing concern. He noted Winters' uniform immediately, recognizing the distinctive badges of the 3rd Infantry Regiment, the Old Guard, and specifically the Tomb Guard Identification Badge, one of the rarest decorations in the military. Winters, meanwhile, was calculating his options. His primary duty was to PFC Morales, and creating a scene would dishonor that responsibility. Yet he also couldn't abandon his post or delay the carefully arranged transfer schedule. The family was waiting, having already endured the unimaginable pain of losing their daughter. "Mr. Keller," Winters tried again, "perhaps we could contact the airport's military liaison office together? They can verify everything immediately." "Already told you, soldier," Keller responded, emphasizing the word soldier with thinly veiled contempt. "Either you go back and get proper credentials, or you wait here while I call my supervisor. Those are your only options." As this exchange continued, Rodriguez quietly stepped away and made a discreet phone call, speaking rapidly into her mobile device. Travelers continued to gather, many now openly watching the confrontation. Among them was Maria Chen, an international business consultant who had been hurrying to catch a connection to Chicago. She stopped when she saw the flag-draped transfer case, instantly recognizing its significance. "Is that security guy seriously blocking a fallen soldier?" She whispered to the person next to her, her voice thick with disbelief. Nearby, an elderly couple wearing matching Vietnam veteran caps looked on with increasing disapproval. The husband, leaning heavily on a cane, whispered something to his wife, who nodded grimly. Winters maintained his composure, though internally he was struggling with mounting frustration. Every minute delayed was another minute PFC Morales' family waited. Another minute their daughter remained in transit rather than coming home. The thought of their grief, compounded by unnecessary bureaucratic obstacles, was nearly unbearable. "Sir," Winters said, making one final attempt, "I understand you have procedures to follow, but I also have my duty. Private First Class Jessica Morales gave her life in service to this country. The very least we can do is ensure she returns home to her family with dignity and without unnecessary delay." For a moment, something flickered across Keller's face, perhaps a brief recognition of the gravity of the situation. But as quickly as it appeared, it vanished, replaced by his previous expression of bureaucratic intransigence. "Not my problem," Keller repeated. "Rules don't change just because someone's in uniform." These words hung in the air for a moment. Before Colonel Harrington decided he'd heard enough, the retired Marine stepped forward, his presence commanding immediate attention. "Excuse me," Harrington said, his voice carrying the natural authority of someone accustomed to command. "I couldn't help but overhear this situation. I'm Colonel James Harrington, USMC, retired. Perhaps I can help clarify some things." Keller turned, visibly annoyed at yet another interruption. "Sir, this doesn't concern you." "I beg to differ," Harrington replied evenly. "When a tomb guard is escorting a fallen soldier and being obstructed in his duties, it concerns every American citizen, especially those who have served." Winters acknowledged the colonel with a respectful nod, but remained focused on his charge. He wouldn't allow himself to be distracted, even as he appreciated the support. "Look," Keller said, his patience clearly waning, "I don't care if you're a retired whatever. Airport security isn't a military matter. I have procedures to follow." "Indeed you do," Harrington agreed, his tone deceptively mild. "And I'm quite familiar with those procedures, having consulted on their development after 9/11. Nothing in those procedures authorizes you to obstruct a military escort for a fallen service member, especially one with proper documentation." More travelers had stopped now, forming a loose semicircle around the scene. Phones had appeared in many hands, some discreetly recording the confrontation. The crowd had grown large enough that other airport staff were beginning to take notice, including a young gate agent named Trevor Phillips, who had been watching with increasing concern from a nearby check-in counter. Rodriguez returned from making her call, stepping closer to Winters and whispering something in his ear. He gave an almost imperceptible nod, but maintained his position, unwavering in his duty to stand by PFC Morales. "This is becoming disruptive," Keller announced, looking around at the gathering crowd. "I'm going to have to call for additional security personnel." "Before you do that," came a new voice, clear and authoritative, "perhaps you should speak with me." The crowd parted to reveal a woman in her 50s, wearing the uniform of an airport operations executive. Her name badge identified her as Patricia Lawson, Director of Terminal Operations. Her expression was gravely serious as she approached, flanked by 2 airport police officers and a man in a dark suit who carried himself with military bearing. "Mr. Keller," Lawson said, her voice controlled but with an edge that suggested barely contained anger, "I've just been informed of this situation. Would you care to explain why you're preventing a military escort from completing their official duties?" Keller straightened, clearly surprised by the appearance of his superior. "Ma'am, they don't have the proper credentials for this secure area. I'm just following protocol." "Are these the documents in question?" Lawson asked, taking the papers from Winter's hand. She reviewed them quickly, then passed them to the man in the suit, who nodded after a brief examination. "These are completely in order," the man said. He turned to Winters. "Staff Sergeant, I'm Thomas Grayson, Military Liaison Officer for the Airport Authority. I personally cleared this transfer this morning." Lawson turned back to Keller, her expression hardening. Mr. Keller, these documents provide all necessary authorization. Staff Sergeant Winters and Airman Rodriguez are acting under official orders that supersede standard access protocols. Keller's face flushed. But the regular procedure... The procedure, Lawson interrupted firmly, includes special provisions for military escorts of fallen service members. This is clearly outlined in Section 4.3 of our operations manual, which you should be thoroughly familiar with as a supervisor. The crowd had grown silent, watching the exchange with rapt attention. The atmosphere in the terminal had transformed. What had been a place of hurried transitions and casual indifference was now charged with a solemn energy. Furthermore, Lawson continued, I've received multiple calls in the last 5 minutes from passengers concerned about your conduct. Would you like me to enumerate them here, or shall we discuss this in private after Staff Sergeant Winters has been allowed to continue his sacred duty without further interruption? Keller's posture deflated slightly as he realized his position was untenable. I was just trying to follow security protocols, ma'am. Security is important, Lawson acknowledged, but so is respect, so is compassion, and so is recognizing when to apply judgment rather than blindly following rules without understanding their purpose or exceptions. She turned to Winters, her tone shifting from stern reprimand to respectful deference. Staff Sergeant, on behalf of the airport authority, I apologize for this unconscionable delay. Please, continue your escort. We'll ensure there are no further obstacles. Winters nodded, his expression remaining composed. Thank you, ma'am. As Winters prepared to continue his solemn journey through the terminal with PFC Morales, something unexpected began to happen. Colonel Harrington, standing nearby, straightened his posture and raised his right hand in a crisp salute toward the flag-draped transfer case. The elderly Vietnam veteran, despite his physical difficulty, pushed himself upright from his cane to do the same. Then, as if by unspoken agreement, other military personnel in the terminal, both active duty and veterans, began to appear from the crowd, stepping forward and rendering salutes. A young woman in army fatigues who had been hurrying to catch a flight stopped abruptly, set down her duffel bag, and stood at attention, her salute unwavering. What happened next would later be described by witnesses as one of the most moving displays of spontaneous respect they had ever witnessed. Trevor Phillips, the young gate agent who had been watching events unfold, made a decision. He approached. The nearest gate counter picked up the public address microphone, and after a brief hesitation, his voice rang out across the terminal. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced, his voice slightly trembling but growing in confidence. May I have your attention, please? A fallen American soldier is passing through our terminal right now, returning home for the final time. As a sign of respect, we ask that you pause for a moment of silence. The effect was immediate and profound. Throughout the busy terminal, motion seemed to cease. Travelers stopped in their tracks. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Airport staff stepped away from counters. Even the constant background noise of rolling luggage and boarding announcements fell silent. Diane Whitaker, the teacher who had first spoken up, placed her hand over her heart. Around her, others did the same. Many removed hats or caps. Some bowed their heads. A few wiped away tears. In that moment, the artificial divisions that normally separated the hundreds of strangers in the terminal, differences of politics, religion, race, and background, seemed to dissolve. There was only shared humanity and collective respect. As the profound silence continued to envelop the terminal, Winters took a deep breath and began to guide the transfer case forward with measured steps. His movements were deliberate and ceremonial, reminiscent of the precise 21 steps he took while guarding the tomb of the unknown soldier. Each step now carried the same weight of purpose, the same sacred duty. The crowd parted naturally. before him, creating a path of honor through the terminal. No one spoke, no one rushed. The usual frantic pace of airport life had been suspended in collective reverence. Sophia Rodriguez walked alongside, her posture mirroring Winter's solemn dignity. Behind them, Patricia Lawson and Thomas Grayson followed at a respectful distance, ensuring no further obstacles would impede the procession. Bernard Keller had quietly withdrawn, his face a mixture of embarrassment and dawning comprehension of the magnitude of his error. Colonel Harrington maintained his salute as the transfer case passed, only lowering his hand when protocol dictated. Then, in a spontaneous gesture that would later be described in dozens of social media posts, he fell into step behind the official escort, creating an impromptu honor guard. The elderly Vietnam veteran and his wife joined, followed by the young Army soldier who had abandoned her rush to catch a flight. As they proceeded through the terminal, more military personnel emerged from the crowd to join the procession. An Air Force captain returning from leave, 2 Navy officers in dress whites, a young Marine lance corporal who had been saying goodbye to his parents. None of them spoke or coordinated. They simply understood what needed to be done. Travelers lining the makeshift corridor stood in respectful silence. Many placed hands over hearts. Parents held children close, whispering explanations about sacrifice and honor. An international businessman from Japan bowed deeply as the procession passed. A group of high school students on a class trip, initially chattering and absorbed in their phones, fell silent and stood straight when they saw what was happening. Trevor Phillips continued to coordinate from the gate desk, contacting other areas of the terminal ahead of the procession's path. Gate agents throughout the concourse suspended boarding announcements. At one checkpoint, TSA agents temporarily halted screenings and stood at attention as the transfer case approached. Maria Chen, the business consultant who had nearly missed, witnessing this powerful moment in her rush to catch her connection, found herself unexpectedly moved to tears. She had traveled through countless airports in dozens of countries, but had never seen anything like this transformation of a mundane public space into a corridor of honor. "Who was she?" Chen whispered to Colonel Harrington, who was now walking nearby. "Private First Class Jessica." "Morales," Harrington replied quietly. 23 years old, from Nebraska." Chen nodded, committing the name to memory. Later, she would cancel her meeting in Chicago and book a different flight, feeling that rushing onward immediately would somehow dishonor what she had witnessed. As the procession continued, they passed Gate C-14, where a flight to Dallas was preparing to board. The gate agent there, a woman named Elaine Murray, whose brother had served in Afghanistan, made an executive decision. She stepped away from the counter, approached the passengers waiting to board, and spoke quietly to them. "Ladies and gentlemen, I need to delay our boarding for approximately 5 minutes. A fallen soldier is being escorted through our terminal, and out of respect, we're observing a brief pause in operations." There was no grumbling, no complaints about tight connections or schedule disruptions. Instead, many passengers stood, gathering near the large windows overlooking the tarmac. Without instruction, they formed a line of silent witnesses as the escort passed their gate. Among them was Daniel Foster, a corporate executive who typically spent flights complaining about travel inconveniences. Today, watching the flag-draped transfer case, he felt a perspective shift that would stay with him long after. His missed connection suddenly seemed trivial compared to PFC Morales' final journey. The silence throughout the terminal was broken only by the occasional announcement that couldn't be suppressed. A final boarding call for an international departure, a security alert for an unattended bag. Even these seemed muted, delivered in hushed, respectful tones. As they approached the central atrium of the terminal, Winters noticed something extraordinary happening on the levels above. Travelers and airport staff had gathered along the railings of the upper floors, looking down on the procession. Some held makeshift signs hastily created from notebook paper or tablet screens. "Thank you for your service, and God bless our troops," and simply respect. Maaiji, an elderly custodian named Harold Washington, who'd been polishing the same section of railing for several minutes, caught Winter's eye. The old man straightened as much as his arthritis-curved spine would allow, and offered a weathered but precise salute. Later, other airport staff would learn that Washington had served in Vietnam, earning a Purple Heart that he never discussed. The procession continued past shops where employees had stepped outside their doorways to stand in silence. At a newsstand, the cashier quickly turned down the volume of the television that had been broadcasting breaking news, recognizing that some moments transcend the day's headlines. Near a children's play area, parents gathered their curious little ones, some lifting them to see the procession over the heads of adults. One mother could be heard gently explaining, "That's an American hero going home." A young boy, of perhaps 6 years old, understanding in the way children sometimes grasp the weight of adult matters, stood perfectly still and straight, his small hand raised in an unpracticed but earnest salute. The path to the next terminal required descending an escalator. Without prompting, travelers cleared the way, standing aside to allow the escort unimpeded passage. 2 airport maintenance workers quickly disabled the moving staircase, transforming it into fixed stairs to facilitate the dignified descent with the transfer case. At the bottom, waiting in quiet anticipation, stood a line of airline pilots and flight attendants from various carriers who had heard about what was happening through staff communications. They formed a corridor of their own, standing at attention in their various uniforms. A multi-airline honor guard that transcended corporate boundaries. As they passed through this gauntlet of respect, Captain Sarah Jenkins of Northern Airlines stepped forward slightly. "Staff Sergeant," she said in a low voice, "we've coordinated with your destination airport. They're prepared for your arrival. Every step of the way home will be handled with the same dignity as here." Winters nodded his appreciation, maintaining his forward gaze as protocol required, but the brief communication reassured him that PFC Morales would be properly honored throughout her journey. The procession had now attracted more than 100 people walking in solemn formation behind the official escort. What had begun as a confrontation had transformed into a powerful demonstration of collective respect that rippled through the terminal like a wave of silent reverence. Near the security exit that would lead to the tarmac and waiting aircraft, Thomas Grayson stepped ahead to ensure the door was ready. Patricia Lawson remained close, her earlier anger at Keller's obstruction now replaced by evident pride in how her airport community had responded to the situation. As they approached the final checkpoint, a surprising figure appeared, Bernard Keller. He stood to the side, his posture stiff but no longer confrontational. As the transfer case drew near, he stepped forward slightly. "Staff Sergeant," he said, his voice tight with emotion, "I want to apologize for my conduct earlier. It was inappropriate and disrespectful." Winters maintained his forward gaze, his stride unbroken, but acknowledged the apology with a slight nod. This wasn't about personal vindication. It was about PFC Morales and the respect she deserved. Behind Keller stood 3 other security supervisors who had arrived after hearing about the incident. Their expressions made clear that they understood the gravity of what had transpired and the impropriety of their colleagues' actions. One of them, a woman with short grey hair, wore a small pin on her uniform that identified her as a veteran herself. As they reached the final security door, there was a momentary pause while clearances were confirmed. During this brief interval, an older gentleman in a rumpled suit approached Colonel Harrington, who had remained with the procession. "Colonel," the man said quietly, introducing himself as Congressman David Miller from Nebraska's 3rd District. "I was on my way back to Washington when I heard what was happening. Private Morales was one of my constituents. Her parents are friends of mine." Harrington nodded. Will you be attending the funeral, sir? Yes, the congressman replied, but more importantly, I'll be introducing legislation next week to ensure this kind of obstruction never happens again. We're going to call it the Morales Protocol, standardized procedures for all transportation hubs to properly honor and facilitate the movement of our fallen. This exchange, overheard by several nearby travelers, would later be shared widely on social media, eventually gathering enough public support to help ensure the legislation's passage with rare bipartisan support. The security door opened, revealing the tarmac where an aircraft waited. Unlike the usual passenger boarding process, this plane sat alone, set apart from the regular gates. Ground crew stood at attention near the cargo hold that had been specially prepared to transport PFC Morales with dignity. As Winters guided the transfer case toward the waiting aircraft, something unexpected happened on the tarmac. The ground crews from multiple airlines, baggage handlers, fuelers, mechanics, and marshals had formed lines on either side of the path to the plane. These men and women, who normally worked behind the scenes in the daily chaos of airport operations, now stood in respectful formation, many with hats removed despite the bright sun. From somewhere in the gathered crowd, a voice began to sing, "God Bless America." Others joined, the melody swelling softly through the terminal and out onto the tarmac. The spontaneous chorus crossed age and demographic boundaries. An international. Students stood singing beside a retired school teacher, a businessman in an expensive suit alongside a young mother cradling a sleeping infant. As the transfer case was carefully secured in the aircraft's hold, Winters maintained his vigilant watch. His duty would continue until he delivered PFC Morales to her family in Nebraska. Rodriguez completed the necessary paperwork with the flight crew, ensuring every detail was properly documented. The travelers and airport staff who had gathered began to disperse slowly, returning to their interrupted journeys and duties. But something had changed. The usual impatient rush had been replaced by a more measured pace. Strangers who had stood shoulder to shoulder in witness now exchanged quiet nods of acknowledgement. The shared experience had, however briefly, transformed a collection of individual travelers into a community. Back inside the terminal, Patricia Lawson found Trevor Phillips at his gate counter. "That was a brave thing you did with that announcement," she said. Phillips looked concerned. "I know. It wasn't standard procedure, ma'am. If there's disciplinary action, Lawson interrupted with a slight smile. "Mr. Phillips, what you did today exemplified the very best of what we hope to be as an organization. There will be a commendation in your file, not a reprimand." Nearby, Bernard Keller sat alone on a bench, his expression troubled. The confrontation and its aftermath had shaken something loose in him, a realization about the purpose behind the rules he so rigidly enforced. Colonel Harrington, noticing the security supervisor's isolation, made a decision that surprised even himself. He sat down beside Keller. "Tough day," Harrington observed mildly. Keller nodded, not meeting the colonel's eyes. "I screwed up badly." "You did," Harrington agreed, his tone matter-of-fact rather than accusatory. "But the question is what you learn from it." "I don't think there's much of a future for me here after this," Keller said. Perhaps not," Harrington replied. "But let me tell you something about military service, Mr. Keller. We don't just value those who never make mistakes. We value those who can recognize their errors, take responsibility, and change course accordingly." Keller finally looked up. "Why are you even talking to me? I disrespected everything you stand for." Because," Harrington said simply, "in my 30 years of service, I learned that rehabilitation is usually more valuable than punishment. You have expertise and experience that this airport needs, if it's guided by the right principles." This conversation would mark the beginning of a significant change in Keller's approach to his work. While there would indeed be administrative consequences for his actions that day, he would ultimately remain at the airport, eventually becoming an advocate for the formal implementation of the Morales Protocol and a liaison for military families. Elsewhere in the terminal, Diane Whitaker was speaking with Maria Chen. Two women from different worlds, they had found connection in the shared experience. "I've never seen anything like that," Chen said, still visibly moved. "In all my travels, in all the airports I've rushed through, I never stopped to think about journeys like hers." "My son came home safely from his deployments," Whitaker replied, "but he lost friends who didn't. He told me once that the hardest part wasn't the danger or the conditions. It was worrying that people back home might forget the sacrifice, if it didn't touch them personally." "I won't forget," Chen promised. She glanced at her watch, then at the departure board. "My meeting in Chicago doesn't seem very important right now. Will you reschedule?" "Yes," Chen said thoughtfully. "But first, I think I'll see if there are any flights to Nebraska. I'd like to pay my respects at the funeral if the family would allow it." She wasn't alone in this sentiment. In the days that followed, as news of the airport's transformation spread through social media and news reports, many who had witnessed the event would make similar decisions. PFC Jessica Morales, who might otherwise have been mourned only by family and close friends in her small hometown, would be honored by hundreds of strangers who had been present for her final journey through Reagan National Airport. The aircraft, carrying PFC Morales and Staff Sergeant Winters, departed without the usual announcements or fanfare. Air traffic controllers gave it priority clearance, and pilots of other aircraft waiting to taxi offered silent salutes from their cockpits as the plane passed. In the terminal, regular operations gradually resumed. Boarding announcements returned to their normal volume. Security checkpoints resumed their standard procedures. Travelers hurried to make connections or find coffee or locate their luggage. Yet subtle changes remained. Conversations between strangers occurred more frequently. Small courtesies, a held door, offered assistance with a heavy bag, seemed more common. The memorial flowers that appeared spontaneously near gate C-14 were respectfully maintained by cleaning staff rather than removed as unauthorized decorations. Patricia Lawson returned to her office to find several voice messages waiting, inquiries from other airport directors who had heard about the incident and wanted to know more about how to implement similar protocols. What had begun as an unfortunate confrontation was already catalyzing positive change throughout the air transportation system. As her final act of the day, Lawson drafted a formal letter to the Department of Defense, commending Staff Sergeant Michael Winters for his dignified and professional conduct under difficult circumstances. She also wrote a personal note to the family of PFC Morales, expressing the airport community's condolences and profound respect. 35,000 feet above America's heartland, Staff Sergeant Michael Winters sat beside the specially designated cargo hold containing PFC Jessica Morales. The airline had cordoned off a small section of the aircraft, creating a quiet zone of respect around the fallen soldier's transfer case. Though regulations didn't require his physical presence during the flight, only that he maintained chain of custody, Winters had chosen to remain as close as possible to his charge. It was what felt right. The pilot had made a brief, solemn announcement at the beginning of the flight, informing passengers they were carrying a fallen service member home. Since then, the cabin had maintained a respectful atmosphere. Flight. Attendants moved with deliberate quietness near his section, and passengers who walked past to use the restroom often paused, nodding acknowledgements or whispering brief thanks for his service. Winters gazed out the window at the landscape below, endless patchwork fields, veined with highways and dotted with small towns. Somewhere down there was Clearwater, Nebraska, a community of barely 3,000 souls about to receive its daughter home for the final time. He thought about what awaited at their destination, the family whose grief he was about to witness, the community gathering to honor one of their own. Across the aisle, Airman Rodriguez worked quietly on her tablet, coordinating the complex logistics of their arrival. She looked up, catching Winter's reflection in the window. "Staff Sergeant," she said softly, "there's something you should know. Word about what happened at Reagan has spread. There's been a response." She handed him her tablet. Open to a news website with the headline, "Terminal Standstill, Extraordinary Show of Respect for Fallen Soldier at Reagan National." Below were photographs taken by travelers, the spontaneous procession, the crowds lining the upper levels, ground crews standing at attention on the tarmac. Winters scrolled through the article with growing astonishment. It described in detail how a member of the elite Tomb Guard regiment had been obstructed by security while escorting a fallen soldier, and how the terminal had transformed in response. There were quotes from witnesses, including Colonel Harrington and Congresswoman Miller, who had already issued a formal statement about the forthcoming Morales Protocol legislation. But what truly caught his attention were the comments below. The article, thousands of them from across the country. "My brother served with the 10th Mountain Division. Thank you for honoring our fallen this way. I was at Reagan yesterday in Terminal C. I've never been so proud to be an American as when everyone just stopped and stood in silence. To PFC Morales's family, a grateful nation mourns with you. Your daughter's sacrifice will not be forgotten." As he read, a notification appeared on the screen, a breaking news update. Rodriguez leaned over to see it, then inhaled sharply. "Sir," she said, her voice barely audible, "they're organizing something in Clearwater." The update showed social media activity indicating that residents throughout Nebraska and neighboring states were planning to line the route from the airport to the funeral home in Clearwater. What had begun as a local effort had apparently grown exponentially as the story spread online. "How many people?" Winters asked, maintaining his composed exterior despite his surprise. "Current estimates suggest several thousand," Rodriguez replied. "And sir, there's more. Veterans groups from across the Midwest are mobilizing. The Patriot Guard Riders, local VFW chapters, police and fire departments from 3 states. Winters handed the tablet back to Rodriguez, his expression thoughtful. His training as a tomb guard had prepared him for maintaining perfect composure in all circumstances, to stand unwavering through storms, to execute his duties with flawless precision regardless of audience or conditions. But nothing in that training had prepared him for becoming part of a story that was touching hearts across the nation. "Airman Rodriguez," he said after a moment, "contact the funeral director in Clearwater. Make sure the family is prepared for this. This isn't about us, and it isn't about making a statement. It's about PFC Morales and her family. If they want privacy, we need to respect that." Rodriguez nodded and immediately began making calls. After several minutes, she turned back to Winters. "Sir, I spoke with Mr. Callahan at the funeral home. He's already been in touch with the Morales family about the situation. They're—" she paused, searching for the right words. "They're deeply moved by the response. Mrs. Morales specifically said that Jessica would have been amazed to know she brought so many people together." Winters nodded, relieved that the family found comfort rather than additional stress in the unexpected attention. He returned his gaze to the window, to the vast country passing below. In Arlington, at the tomb of the unknown soldier, he had been part of a solemn tradition of honoring the nameless fallen. Now he found himself participating in something different but equally profound, a spontaneous nationwide movement to Ensure that PFC Jessica Morales would be remembered. The flight captain's voice came over the intercom, interrupting his thoughts. Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our initial descent into Lincoln Municipal Airport. Current weather is clear skies, temperature 72 degrees. We'll be landing in approximately 20 minutes. At this time, I'd like to inform you that we will be participating in a special arrival ceremony for our fallen hero on board. Upon landing, we ask all passengers to remain seated until our escort team has disembarked with Private First Class Morales. Thank you for your cooperation and respect. As the announcement concluded, a silver-haired man across the aisle leaned toward Winters. "Were you with her in Afghanistan?" Winters shook his head. "No, sir. I'm a sentinel at the tomb of the unknown soldier. I was assigned escort duty." The man nodded thoughtfully. "I was in Vietnam. Different war, same duty, bringing our comrades home." His voice trailed off, heavy with memories. "You're doing sacred work, son." Winters acknowledged this with a respectful nod. The term sacred resonated with him. As a tomb guard, he had often thought about the sacred nature of his duty to the unknown soldiers, those who had made the ultimate sacrifice without even the consolation of being remembered by name. There was something fundamentally sacred about ensuring no sacrifice was forgotten, no service dishonored. The aircraft began its descent, banking gently over the Nebraska landscape. Winters prepared himself mentally for what awaited them. As the wheels touched down on the runway, he noticed something through his window, flashing lights lining the tarmac. Not just the usual airport vehicles, but dozens of emergency vehicles from what appeared to be every jurisdiction in the region. As the aircraft taxied toward the terminal, the view became clearer. A massive American flag hung between the extended ladders of two fire trucks. Lines of uniformed personnel, police, firefighters, emergency medical technicians, stood at attention along the taxiway. Beyond them, visible even from the aircraft, crowds of civilians had gathered at the airport perimeter, many holding flags or signs. The aircraft came to a stop, not at a regular gate, but at a special area of the tarmac. Through the window, Winters could see an honor guard assembled on the ground, military personnel from different branches standing in perfect formation. Nearby stood a family, a middle-aged couple supporting each other, flanked by a young man in his 20s and an elderly woman in a wheelchair, the Morales family waiting to receive their daughter, sister, granddaughter. The flight attendant approached Winters. "Staff Sergeant, whenever you're ready. The ground crew is prepared." Winters stood, straightening his already immaculate uniform. "Thank you for the care you've shown during this flight," he said to the attendant. "It means more than you know." As he moved toward the aircraft door, passengers throughout the cabin rose to their feet in silent respect. A businessman who had been working on his laptop throughout the flight closed it and stood, hand over heart. A young mother lifted her curious child to see, whispering explanations about heroes and sacrifice. Airman Rodriguez followed Winters, carrying their documentation and coordinating via radio with the ground crew. As the aircraft door opened, Winters was struck by the silence outside. Hundreds of people, yet barely a sound beyond the diminishing whine of the aircraft engines. The ground crew had positioned a scissor lift to carefully lower PFC Morales' transfer case from the cargo hold. Winters descended the aircraft steps and took his position beside the lift, standing at attention as the flag-draped case emerged from the hold. 6 members of the honor guard approached, moving with precision to receive their fallen comrade. With practiced reverence, they transferred PFC Morales from the lift to a wheeled bier that would convey her to the waiting hearse. Winters supervised every movement, ensuring each step maintained the dignity this moment demanded. When the transfer was complete, he approached the Morales family, who had been escorted to a position near the hearse. Standing before them, Winters came to attention and rendered a perfect salute, not to them but to their daughter's sacrifice. Then he spoke the words he had prepared during the flight. "Mr. and Mrs. Morales, on behalf of the President of the United States Army, and a grateful nation, I have the solemn privilege of returning your daughter, Private First Class Jessica Morales, to your care. Her service to our country and her ultimate sacrifice represent the highest ideals of duty, honor, and courage." Mrs. Morales, a small woman with Jessica's same determined eyes, stepped forward. "Thank you for bringing our daughter home with such dignity," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "We heard what happened at the airport in Washington, how you stood for her." "It was my honor, ma'am," Winters replied simply. Mr. Morales, a weathered man with calloused hands that spoke of a lifetime of farming, reached out to shake Winters' hand. His grip was firm, despite his evident grief. "Jessica wrote to us about the tomb guards," he said. "She visited Arlington on leave last year. Said watching you Sentinels was one of the most powerful things she'd ever seen. Said it reminded her why the uniform mattered." This unexpected connection momentarily threatened Winters' composed demeanor. The thought that PFC Morales had stood watching him or his fellow Sentinels perform their measured patrol, never knowing that one day he would escort her home, created a profound circle of duty and honor that transcended their individual roles. The funeral director approached, indicating it was time to begin the procession to Clearwater. The honor guard carefully placed PFC Morales' transfer case in the waiting hearse. Winters would ride in the lead vehicle with the funeral director, and Airman Rodriguez, maintaining his escort duty until the funeral home received PFC Morales. As they prepared to depart, the airport's ground traffic controller's voice came over external speakers. A breach of normal protocol that had clearly been approved for this exceptional circumstance. "Lincoln Municipal Airport is observing a moment of silence for Private First Class Jessica Morales returning home to Nebraska soil. All ground operations and air traffic are paused in her honor." For 60 seconds, not a vehicle moved, not an aircraft taxied. Even the birds seemed to respect the stillness. Then with dignified slowness, the procession began to move away from the terminal. What awaited them beyond the airport perimeter exceeded even the reports they had received on the flight. The highway leading toward Clearwater had been transformed. For miles, as far as Winters could see from the lead vehicle, people lined both sides of the road, standing shoulder to shoulder, holding flags, saluting, or simply standing in respectful silence. Local law enforcement had blocked all intersections. Every overpass was filled with people and banners. Fire trucks were positioned at intervals, their ladders extended to display massive American flags under which the procession would pass. In small towns along the route, schools had dismissed classes so students and teachers could pay their respects. Farmers had parked their equipment along the roadside, standing with hats held over hearts as the hearse passed. "I've never seen anything like this," the funeral director said quietly from the driver's seat. "We've had military funerals before, but this is extraordinary." Rodriguez, monitoring social media on her tablet, provided context. "Sir, it's not just here. The story has gone national. Stand for Jessica is trending. There are vigils being organized in cities across the country. Military bases worldwide are holding memorial formations." As they drove through a small town about halfway to Clearwater, Winters noticed something unexpected. Hundreds of people holding candles, despite the daylight, creating a corridor of light through which the procession passed. A hastily erected banner stretched across the main street read, "Thank you, PFC Morales, Clearwater's daughter, America's hero." In another community, schoolchildren had lined the route, each holding a single flower. As the hearse passed, they placed their flowers on the roadside, creating a growing memorial that would eventually stretch for miles. The funeral director, a man who had served his community through countless moments of grief, wiped tears from his eyes as they drove. In 30 years doing this work, I've never witnessed a response like this. She's bringing people together in death in a way few manage in life. As they approached Clearwater itself, the scene became even more poignant. The small farming community had transformed its main street. Every building displayed American flags. Every lamppost bore yellow ribbons. The town's water tower, visible from miles away, had been draped with a massive banner bearing Jessica's photograph in uniform, her confident smile now watching over the community she had left to serve her country. The entire population of Clearwater, it seemed, had turned out to welcome their daughter home. Elderly residents in wheelchairs, pushed by caregivers, infants in parents' arms, farmers in work clothes standing alongside business owners who had closed their shops. Jessica's former high school classmates, some in military uniforms of their own, forming an impromptu honor guard outside the funeral home. As the procession slowed to turn onto Clearwater's main street, Winters caught sight of something that finally threatened to break through his professional composure. Jessica's high school softball team, standing in their uniforms, each player holding a portion of a banner that read, "Our teammate, our inspiration, our hero." The hearse came to a stop outside the small funeral home, where another honor guard waited to carry PFC Morales inside. Winters stepped out of the lead vehicle, moving to his position beside the hearse door. As the honor guard carefully removed the transfer case, the assembled crowd maintained a respectful silence, broken only by the soft playing of Amazing Grace by a single bagpiper positioned nearby. The Morales family followed as their daughter was carried into the funeral home, the final steps of her long journey home. Winters maintained his vigilant watch until she was safely inside, officially transferred to the funeral director's care. Only then did he step back, his official escort duty complete. But as he turned to leave, Mrs. Morales approached him once more. "Staff Sergeant Winters, we would be honored if you would stay for Jessica's service tomorrow. Not as her escort, but as our guest. You brought our daughter home with dignity when others would have treated her as just another task to be processed. We won't forget that." Winters, deeply moved by the invitation, accepted with gratitude. That evening, as he and Rodriguez checked into the small hotel in Clearwater, they discovered that residents had arranged everything. Their rooms were paid for, meals had been prepared, and a handwritten note from the mayor welcomed them too. The community. In his hotel room, Winters finally had a moment alone to process the day's events. He removed his jacket carefully, hanging it with the precision that characterized every aspect of a tomb guard's conduct. Sitting on the edge of the bed, he opened his phone to find dozens of messages from fellow Sentinels who had seen the news. Their words of support and pride reminded him that while he had stood alone at Reagan National Airport, he had never truly been alone. One message in particular caught his attention, from Command Sergeant Major Ellis, the head of the Tomb Guard platoon. "Winters, what you did today represents everything the badge stands for. You honored not just PFC Morales, but every service member who has ever made the ultimate sacrifice. Well done, Sentinel." Winters set his phone aside and moved to the window. Outside, despite the late hour, candles flickered throughout Clearwater. Light after light in the darkness, each representing a life touched by Jessica Morales and unexpectedly by his own quiet stand for respect and dignity. Tomorrow would bring the funeral service, with its rituals of grief and remembrance. But tonight, looking out at those lights, Winters felt something powerful taking shape, a renewed understanding that in a world often divided by politics, geography, and belief, the capacity to stand together in respect for sacrifice remained a unifying force. The unexpected journey that had begun with a confrontation at Reagan National Airport had become something far greater, a reminder to a nation of what it meant to honor not just the fallen, but the values for which they had served. Dawn broke gently over Clearwater, Nebraska, bathing the small town in soft golden light. Staff Sergeant Michael Winters had risen before sunrise, a habit formed through years of pre-dawn shifts at the tomb of the unknown soldier. He stood at his hotel window, watching as the community awakened on the day they would lay their daughter to rest. Already, movement was visible throughout the town. Volunteers hung additional flags along the route to the cemetery. Townspeople carried flowers and homemade signs toward the high school gymnasium where the service would be held, the only venue in Clearwater large enough to accommodate the anticipated attendance. News vans had established positions on the outskirts, respecting the family's request for discretion while still covering what had become a national story. Winters dressed with meticulous care, each element of his dress blue uniform positioned with perfect precision. The uniform represented not just his personal service, but the institution he served and the values it upheld. Today, wearing it in, Clearwater took on additional significance. He was no longer just PFC Morales' escort, but a symbol of the military brotherhood that had embraced her in life and now honored her in death. As he fastened the Tomb Guard identification badge to his uniform, the least awarded badge in the U.S. Army, he thought about its meaning. The badge featured Athena, goddess of war, holding a raised sword crossed by a wreath over a columned facade. It symbolized the eternal vigilance maintained for those who gave everything for their country. Today, that vigilance extended from the nameless heroes at Arlington to a young woman from this small farming community. A knock at his door announced Airman Rodriguez, similarly attired in her dress blues. "Staff Sergeant, the Morales family has sent a car for us. They've asked if you would join them before the service." Downstairs, they found not a formal funeral vehicle, but a weather-worn pickup truck driven by Jessica's older brother, Michael Morales. He greeted them with the straightforward manner of someone raised on the plains, where actions spoke louder than words. "Appreciate you coming," he said simply, as they climbed into the truck. "Mom and Dad wanted some time with you before things get public." The Morales home sat on the outskirts of town, a modest farmhouse surrounded by cornfields, stretching to the horizon. A flagpole in the front yard displayed the American flag at half-staff, gently moving in the morning breeze. On the porch, a worn wooden swing still bore the carving Jess plus Mike, childhood marks made by siblings years before one would go to war. Inside, the house was filled with the controlled chaos of a family preparing for an extraordinary day. Extended relatives arranged food in the kitchen. Friends organized photographs for display at the service. Through it all moved Mr. and Mrs. Morales, supporting each other with the quiet strength of a couple who had weathered decades of challenges together. Mrs. Morales approached as they entered, embracing Rodriguez warmly, and then, after a moment's hesitation, Winters as well. "Thank you for coming early," she said. "We wanted to show you something before the service." She led them to what had clearly been Jessica's room, preserved as she had left it before deployment. Sports trophies, lining shelves, photographs of friends taped to walls, and a worn teddy bear propped against the pillow. But Mrs. Morales directed their attention to something specific, a bulletin board covered with postcards and photographs. Jessica collected these, she explained, pointing to several postcards from Washington, D.C., including one showing Arlington National Cemetery. She visited the tomb of the unknown soldier on her last leave, wrote us that watching the Sentinels changed something in her, helped her understand the deeper meaning of the uniform she wore. Among the photographs was one of Jessica standing, at attention near the tomb, her expression solemn and reverent. Beside it, she had pinned her handwritten note, The Sentinels remind us what it means to serve with perfect dedication. No matter who watches or who remembers, duty remains. Winters stood motionless, struck by the profound connection. Without knowing it, he might have been on duty the very day she visited. While he maintained his watch for the unknown, she had found meaning that she carried with her to Afghanistan. Mr. Morales joined them, holding a small wooden box. "We wanted to give you this," he said, offering it to Winters, not as Jessica's escort, but as a representative of the Sentinels who meant something to her. Inside the box lay a worn compass with the inscription, "Find your true north. Love, Dad." Mr. Morales explained quietly. "Gave this to her when she enlisted. She carried it everywhere. Figure it should go back to Arlington, to the place that inspired her. Maybe keep it at the tomb quarters. Somewhere her spirit can still connect to the duty she admired." Winters accepted the gift with profound gratitude, understanding the depth of trust it represented. "I'll ensure it holds a place of honor, sir." As they prepared to leave for the service, Mrs. Morales touched Winters' arm. "One more thing, Sergeant. The dress uniform Jessica would have been buried in was damaged in the explosion. The Army sent a replacement, but—" She hesitated, then continued, "We've heard about the precision your Sentinels maintain with your uniforms. Would you mind checking hers? It would mean a lot to know it's perfect." In the adjacent room, Jessica's dress uniform lay prepared on a bed. Winters approached it with the same reverence he would show a fellow Sentinel's uniform before inspection. With practiced eyes, he examined every detail, the alignment of ribbons, the positioning of badges, the precise angle of the service cap. He made several small adjustments, each movement deliberate and respectful. "Now it's ready," he said softly. "It meets the standard she admired." The gymnasium of Clearwater High School had been transformed for the service. The basketball court where Jessica had once played was now filled with rows of chairs, already filling with mourners 2 hours before the scheduled start. The school's trophy case displayed Jessica's athletic awards alongside her military photographs. The walls, normally decorated with team pennants, now held banners created by students, Clearwater's hero, and always remembered, never forgotten. Outside, a remarkable scene was unfolding. Thousands of people, far more than Clearwater's entire population, had traveled from across Nebraska and neighboring states. Veterans' motorcycle groups provided a respectful perimeter. Military personnel from nearby bases stood in formation. A group of farmers had parked their tractors in a ceremonial line, each machine adorned with American flags. Inside the gymnasium, as the Morales family entered with Winters and Rodriguez, a hushed reverence fell over the assembled mourners. The family took their places in the front row, while Winters and Rodriguez moved to positions with other military personnel. The service itself blended military precision with the intimate warmth of a community that had known Jessica since childhood. Her high school softball coach spoke of her determination. Her first sergeant recalled her unwavering reliability in difficult situations. Her childhood best friend shared stories that brought gentle laughter, moments of light amid the grief. When the formal eulogy concluded, Mrs. Morales approached the podium. Though visibly emotional, her voice remained steady as she addressed the gathering. "Jessica loved this town," she began. "Loved the people, the open skies, the sense of community. But she also yearned to serve something larger than herself. That's what took her from us, but it's also what made her who she was." She paused, gathering strength before continuing. 2 days ago, when Jessica came home, something extraordinary happened. People she never met stood in silence as she passed. Children made memorials, veterans saluted. An entire airport stood still. Mrs. Morales then gestured toward Winters. "And it began because one soldier, a guardian of the unknown, refused to let my daughter be treated as just another burden in someone's busy day. Staff Sergeant Winters reminded a hurried world that some journeys deserve reverence. Her next words resonated through the silent gymnasium. That's Jessica's final gift to us all. Through her life, her service, and yes, through her death, she reminds us to stand for something greater than ourselves, to honor sacrifice, to remember that beneath the politics and the differences that often divide us, we share common values worth protecting. As Mrs. Morales returned to her seat, the high school choir rose to perform Amazing Grace. There, young voices filled the space with poignant harmony, the next generation honoring one of their own who would never return to join their reunions or see her own children grow. Following the service, the funeral procession to Clearwater Cemetery stretched for miles. Fire trucks with ladders extended formed arches of honor along the route. Schools had dismissed classes so students could stand in respect as Jessica passed. Farmers stopped their work in the fields, removing their hats and standing at attention beside their equipment. At the cemetery, military honors awaited. A 7-member firing party stood ready to render the 3-volley salute. An honor guard, prepared to fold the flag that draped PFC Morales's casket with mathematical precision. A bugler positioned himself at a distance to play taps, the haunting melody that had marked military funerals for generations. As the casket was carried to the gravesite by uniformed pallbearers, Winters noticed an unexpected addition to the ceremony. Lining the path stood 7 sentinels from the tomb of the unknown soldier, his fellow tomb guards who had traveled through the night to stand with him in honoring PFC Morales. They had come not under orders, but from a sense of shared purpose and respect. The cemetery service proceeded with the solemn dignity of military tradition. The chaplain offered final prayers. The firing party delivered their rifle salute, the sharp reports echoing across the Nebraska countryside. The honor guard folded the flag with white-gloved precision, transforming it into the symbolic triangle that represented the tricorn hats worn by America's first defenders. When the time came to present the flag to the family, the commanding officer approached Mrs. Morales with measured steps. Kneeling before her, he spoke the time-honored words, "On behalf of the President of the United States Army and a grateful nation, please accept this flag as a symbol of our appreciation for your loved one's honorable and faithful service." Mrs. Morales received the flag, holding it close as tears finally overcame her composed exterior. Mr. Morales placed his arm around her shoulders, his weathered farmer's hand gentle against her trembling form. As taps began, its clear notes carrying. Across the silent cemetery, Winters and his fellow sentinels rendered a final salute, the same precise movement they executed countless times at Arlington, now performed in this small Nebraska cemetery for a soldier who had found meaning in their dedication. The ceremony concluded, but people lingered, reluctant to end this moment of unity and shared purpose. Conversations in hushed tones spread throughout the cemetery, strangers connecting through their common experience of witnessing something profound. Among those conversations, new connections formed that would outlast the day. A Vietnam veteran who had traveled from South Dakota found himself speaking with a recently returned Afghanistan veteran, bridging generations of service. The superintendent of Clearwater Schools discussed with a military education officer how to develop programs helping students understand concepts of duty and sacrifice beyond abstract terms. 2 mothers, one who had lost a son in Iraq years earlier, another whose daughter was currently deployed, exchanged phone numbers, forming a support connection that would sustain them both through difficult days ahead. As the crowd gradually dispersed, Winters found himself approached by an unexpected figure, Bernard Keller, the airport security supervisor, whose obstruction had inadvertently catalyzed the nationwide response. The man looked markedly different from their confrontation days earlier. Humbled, thoughtful, his former rigid demeanor replaced by genuine contrition. "Staff Sergeant," Keller said quietly, "I came to pay my respects and to apologize. Again, in person. What happened at Reagan?" He paused, struggling for words. "I've spent my career focused on rules instead of their purpose. I failed to see the sacred duty you were performing." Winters studied the man for a moment before responding. "Mr. Keller, today isn't about what happened at the airport. It's about PFC Morales and her sacrifice, but I accept your apology." Keller nodded, then added hesitantly, "I've submitted my resignation, effective immediately. But before I leave, I'm helping establish training protocols for all security personnel on proper procedures for military escorts. If any good can come from my failure, perhaps it's that no other fallen service member will face such obstacles coming home." This information aligned with what Patricia Lawson had mentioned to Winters in a message the previous evening. The airport authority was already implementing comprehensive changes, with the Morales Protocol legislation gaining sponsors in Congress. As the cemetery emptied, Winters remained at the gravesite with the Morales family and his fellow Sentinels. The 7 tomb guards who had traveled to Nebraska approached Jessica's parents, each offering a personal word of condolence. Their presence, these guardians of the nameless dead, now honoring a soldier whose name and story would be remembered, created a powerful symbolic bridge between the known and unknown. Sacrifices made in service. When the last visitors had departed, Mrs. Morales turned to Winters. "Jessica would have been overwhelmed by all this attention," she said with a sad smile. "She never sought recognition. But I think she'd be proud that her journey home brought so many people together, even if just for a moment." Mr. Morales, who had been mostly silent throughout the day, finally spoke. "Folks will go back to their lives tomorrow. News crews will find new stories. That's natural. But something has changed. Something will remain." As they prepared to leave the cemetery, Michael Morales, Jessica's brother, approached Winters with a request. "The family plot has room for one more flag beside Jessica's grave. Would your Sentinels consider placing one for the unknown soldiers, to connect her to those she admired?" Without hesitation, Winters nodded. One of the Sentinels retrieved a folded flag from their vehicle. With the same precision they employed at Arlington, 2 guards created a small but perfect memorial. A flag secured in the Nebraska soil, positioned at exactly the correct angle, a symbolic connection between this known grave and the unnamed heroes the Sentinels guarded day and night. That evening, as sunset painted the Nebraska sky in brilliant orange and purple, Winters stood alone at Jessica's grave. His official duties were complete. Tomorrow he would return to Arlington to resume his vigilant watch at the tomb. But tonight, in the quiet of a small-town cemetery, he fulfilled one final personal act of respect. From his pocket, he removed the compass the Morales family had entrusted to him. Beside it, he placed his own Sentinel pin, not the official badge, which could never leave his uniform, but the smaller version given to guards to commemorate their service. Together, these items would travel back to Arlington to be placed in the tomb guard quarters, where Sentinels prepared for their watch. There, they would serve as a tangible reminder of the connection between the named and unnamed, between one soldier from Nebraska and the institutions she had admired. As darkness fell, lights began to appear throughout Clearwater. Candles in windows, porch lights left burning, illuminated flagpoles. From the cemetery's slight elevation, these lights formed a constellation of remembrance spreading across the landscape. Winters thought about the journey that had brought him here, from the confrontation at Reagan National to this peaceful Nebraska evening. What had begun as a routine escort duty had transformed into something far greater, a national moment of unity and reflection on values that transcended political differences and geographic boundaries. The obstacles placed before him at the airport, intended to enforce rules without understanding their purpose, had inadvertently created an opportunity for thousands to demonstrate that some principles remained universally sacred. Respect for sacrifice, honor for service, and the profound duty to ensure no fallen warrior's journey home was treated as ordinary. As he prepared to leave, Winters executed one final salute, perfect in form and meaning. This gesture, performed countless times at Arlington for those who remained forever unknown, now honored one whose name and story had touched a nation. In the days and weeks that followed, the ripples from PFC Morales's journey home continued to spread. The spontaneous airport standstill became a catalyst for the formal adoption of the Morales Protocol in transportation hubs nationwide. Veterans, organizations reported surges in volunteer participation. Schools developed new programs exploring concepts of service and sacrifice. Bernard Keller, rather than fading into regretful obscurity, found unexpected purpose as an advocate for the very protocols he had once obstructed, traveling to airports across the country to share his hard-learned lessons about the difference between following rules and honoring principles. At Arlington National Cemetery, visitors to the tomb of the unknown soldier began leaving notes mentioning Jessica Morales, connections made between her story and the nameless heroes guarded by the Sentinels. Many expressed how the nationwide response to her return had deepened their understanding of what the tomb represented. And in the tomb guard quarters, in a place of honor visible to every sentinel preparing for duty, a worn compass and a sentinel pin now rested in a small display case with a simple inscription, PFC Jessica Morales, who found meaning in our watch and taught a nation to stand still in honor. Staff Sergeant Michael Winters returned to his duties at the tomb, continuing the meticulous rituals of the Sentinels. 21 steps, 21-second pauses, never abandoning their post regardless of weather or circumstance. But now, with each precisely measured step, he carried not just the solemn responsibility to the unknown, but also the profound awareness of how a single stand for dignity could remind a hurried world of what truly deserved its reverence. Because in a nation often divided, the capacity to unite in respect for sacrifice remained a powerful force. And in a world frequently distracted by urgency, the willingness to stand still for what matters most was perhaps the greatest honor anyone could render. If you find yourself moved by this story, remember that respect costs nothing but means everything. Every day presents opportunities to honor those who serve, not just through grand gestures, but through the simple dignity of acknowledgement. Because sometimes the most powerful statement is simply to stop, stand still, and recognize the sacred journeys taking place around us. Subscribe if you believe that honor isn't just a word, but an action, and that every homecoming, especially the final ones, deserves our complete reverence. 6 months after PFC, Jessica Morales returned to Clearwater, Nebraska for the final time. Staff Sergeant Michael Winters stood motionless at his post before the tomb of the unknown soldier. Rain fell steadily from a leaden November sky, droplets gathering on his uniform cap and running in rivulets down his face. He remained perfectly still, his features composed in the disciplined mask of a sentinel, eyes forward, weapon positioned precisely at port arms. To tourists watching from behind the chain barriers, he appeared as all tomb guards do, an unwavering symbol of eternal vigilance, immune to discomfort, distraction, or weather. They couldn't know that behind his stoic expression, Winters was reflecting on how profoundly his life had changed since that confrontation at Reagan National Airport. The Morales Protocol had been signed into law 3 weeks earlier, with remarkably broad bipartisan support. The legislation established standardized procedures for all transportation hubs regarding the movement of fallen service members, ensuring they would receive dignified and unimpeded passage. More significantly, it had sparked a national conversation about how America honors its fallen, not just through official ceremonies, but through everyday moments of respect. As Winters completed his 21 steps and executed the precise ritual turn, he caught sight of a particular group among the visitors. Despite the rain, an entire middle school class stood watching with unusual attentiveness. Their teacher, a woman with bright eyes and a purposeful demeanor, spoke to them in hushed tones, explaining the significance of what they witnessed. Winters didn't break his concentration. Sentinels never do, but he recognized Diane Whitaker, the elementary school teacher from Oregon who had been one of the first to speak up during the airport confrontation. She had written to him afterward, describing how the experience had inspired her to develop a curriculum on civic respect and shared values that was now being adopted by schools nationwide. When his shift ended and the guard change ceremony was complete, Winters made his way back to the Tomb Guard quarters. There, in its place of honor, remained the worn compass that had once guided PFC Morales, now serving as a tangible reminder to every sentinel of the profound connection between their watch and the nation they served. Inside the quarters, Commander Matthews was waiting with unexpected news. Winters, change of plans for tomorrow. You've been requested for a special assignment at the National Cathedral. Matthews handed him an official memorandum. The President is awarding the Presidential Citizens Medal to several individuals who have strengthened national unity and respect for service. You're to represent the Tomb Guard platoon. Winters scanned the document, his composure slipping. Momentarily, when he saw the names of the honorees, Patricia Lawson, the airport operations director who had intervened, Trevor Phillips, the young gate agent who had announced the moment of silence, Maria Chen, whose viral social media posts had helped spread the story nationwide, and Bernard Keller, whose transformation from obstructionist to advocate had become a powerful narrative of personal growth. The citation noted that these individuals inspired a national movement of respect that transcended political, geographic, and demographic boundaries, reminding Americans of the values we hold in common. There's more, Matthews added, gesturing to a stack of mail on the desk. These arrived for you today. The first envelope contained an invitation from Clearwater High School. They were dedicating their new gymnasium to Jessica Morales, and the Morales family had specifically requested Winters' presence at the ceremony. The second was a notification that the Sentinel Story Project, an educational initiative connecting veterans with schools, had exceeded its initial funding goals and was expanding nationwide. The third item wasn't a letter, but a small package from the Smithsonian Institution. Inside was a formal request. The museum was creating an exhibit on moments of national unity and wished to display the uniform Winters had worn during the airport confrontation and subsequent funeral, alongside other artifacts from that remarkable week. Winters set the correspondence aside, momentarily overwhelmed by how a single instance of standing firm for dignity had cascaded into something that continued to affect lives across the country. His reflection was interrupted by the arrival of Private First Class Devon Carter, the newest member of the Tomb Guard platoon. Carter had completed the rigorous Tomb Guard training program just 2 weeks earlier, earning the coveted badge after months of intense preparation and testing. Staff. Sergeant, Carter said, his young face serious, I was hoping to ask you something before tomorrow's ceremony. Winters nodded for him to continue. My cousin serves at Camp Dwyer in Afghanistan. Carter explained. "He sent me this." He held out his phone, displaying a photograph of a small memorial that had been erected at the base. Among the tributes to fallen comrades was a framed quote attributed to PFC Jessica Morales. "The Sentinels remind us what it means to serve with perfect dedication. No matter who watches or who remembers, duty remains." Carter's expression reflected genuine emotion as he continued, "It's not just here at Arlington anymore, sir. What happened with PFC Morales and what you did, it's changing how people think about service and respect everywhere. My cousin said they hold a moment of silence every evening now, no matter what's happening. They call it standing still." This quiet revelation affected Winters more deeply than the official recognitions. The idea that forward-deployed troops, facing daily dangers in harsh conditions, were finding meaning and solace in this practice spoke to something essential about the human need for moments of unified purpose. The following morning dawned clear and cold as Winters prepared for the ceremony at the National Cathedral. He inspected his dress blues with characteristic thoroughness, ensuring every element met the exacting standards of the Tomb Guard. Today, he would represent not just himself or even the Sentinel platoon, but the enduring traditions they upheld. As he fastened his Tomb Guard identification badge, the second least awarded badge in the U.S. military after the astronaut badge, he thought about its symbolism. The badge featured inverted laurel wreaths, symbolizing mourning, the ancient weapon of a warrior's sword, and Athena's helmet representing the goddess of war, all meant to honor and remember the dead. Today, these symbols seemed especially poignant. The ceremony at the National Cathedral brought together individuals from across the country who had been part of the remarkable response to PFC Morales' journey home. The Morales family sat in the front row, their grief now tempered by the knowledge that their daughter's legacy extended far beyond Clearwater. Behind them sat Colonel Harrington, the retired Marine whose intervention had helped resolve the airport confrontation. Airman Rodriguez, who had assisted with the escort, was there with her family. Most striking to Winters was the presence of ordinary citizens who had been part of that spontaneous airport standstill. The businessman who had missed his connection without complaint, the mother who had explained sacrifice to her curious child, the international visitors who had stood in respectful silence despite having no personal connection to American military traditions. The President's address emphasized how rare and valuable such moments of national unity had become. "In an era often defined by division," she said, "the response to PFC Morales' return demonstrated that beneath our differences lie shared values strong enough to bring us together." When Staff Sergeant Winters stood firm on the principle that dignity must never be sacrificed to expediency, he touched something fundamental in our national character. As the medals were presented, each recipient spoke briefly. Patricia Lawson described how airport protocols nationwide had been transformed. Trevor Phillips, now promoted to Customer Service Director, explained how the experience had changed his understanding of leadership. Maria Chen shared how her business consultancy now included civic responsibility training for corporate clients. When Bernard Keller approached the podium, a murmur passed through the audience. Many knew he had been the original obstructionist, whose actions had inadvertently catalyzed the national response. His transformation from obstacle to advocate made his story particularly compelling. "6 months ago," Keller began, "I was the man who tried to block a tomb guard escorting a fallen soldier home. I was so focused on rules that I lost sight of their purpose." His voice grew steadier as he continued. "That day taught me that regulations exist to serve values, not the other way around. Since then, I've visited 47 airports to help implement the Morales Protocol, sharing my mistake so others won't repeat it." He paused, visibly emotional. "I never met PFC Morales in life, but her journey home changed mine. she reminded. Me reminded all of us that some things transcend our differences, some principles unite rather than divide. Following the ceremony, a reception allowed the various participants to connect personally. Winters found himself approached by an unexpected figure, the Secretary of Veterans Affairs, a decorated combat veteran herself. "Staff Sergeant," she said without preamble, "we're establishing a new office focused on dignity in veteran services, ensuring that the respect shown for the fallen extends to all who have served. We'd like you to consult on the initiative when your Tomb Guard service concludes next year." Before Winters could respond, Michael Morales, Jessica's brother, joined them. "He'll be good at it," Michael said with the direct manner of a farmer. "Man who understands the power of standing still in a world that's always rushing somewhere else has wisdom we need." The secretary nodded agreement. "Exactly why we want him." The Morales moment, as people are calling it, revealed something our nation was hungry for, reminders of what we share rather than what separates us. As the conversation continued, Winters observed Jessica's parents speaking with Bernard Keller across the room. Their interaction showed no bitterness or resentment, only the shared purpose that had emerged from their connected experiences. Mr. Morales placed a hand on Keller's shoulder, the gesture conveying forgiveness and acknowledgement of the man's efforts to make amends. Later that evening, as Winters prepared to return to Arlington for his night shift at the tomb, he received a message from Rodriguez with a link to a news story. Around the country, at precisely 3:00 p.m. Eastern Time, the moment when the airport terminal had first fallen silent 6 months earlier, thousands of people had participated in coordinated, standing still observances. Schools had paused classes, offices had suspended operations. Even the floor of Congress had observed the moment, a rare display of unified purpose in that often divided chamber. The spontaneous gesture that had begun in an airport terminal had evolved into something more lasting, a periodic reminder. To pause, to remember shared values, to acknowledge sacrifice, and to recognize the connections that remained strong beneath the surface divisions of American life. As Winters resumed his watch at the tomb that night, the rain had returned, falling softly on the marble monument and the immaculate plaza. A few dedicated visitors remained despite the weather and late hour, watching the unchanging ritual of the guard relief, 21 steps, a 21-second pause, 21 steps back, repeated without variation, regardless of conditions or audience. Among these visitors, Winters noticed a young woman in a wheelchair, accompanied by a man in army fatigues. When his path brought him closer, he recognized her from news coverage, Specialist Amanda Reyes, who had served in PFC Morales' unit and had been injured in the same explosion. She had spent months in rehabilitation, and this appeared to be her first visit to Arlington since returning stateside. Though Winters maintained his ceremonial focus, never acknowledging individual visitors while on duty, he understood the profound importance of this pilgrimage for Specialist Reyes. She had come to honor not just the unknown soldiers guarded by the Sentinels, but also her friend who had inspired a nation to stand still. After completing his shift and the change of guard ceremony, Winters was approached by the guard commander. "Specialist Reyes asked to speak with you if possible," the commander said. "She's waiting by the memorial display." Winters found Reyes examining the small exhibit near the tomb that now included information about the Morales Protocol and the national response it had inspired. Her wheelchair positioned her at eye level with PFC Morales' photograph. "Staff Sergeant Winters," she said, looking up as he approached. "Thank you for making time. I wanted to tell you something about Jess that maybe you don't know." Reyes's companion stepped away discreetly, giving them privacy. "The day before the explosion," she continued, "we were discussing what mattered most to us about serving. Some said protecting America, others mentioned family traditions of service. Jessica talked about her visit to Arlington and watching the tomb guards. Rhea's eyes remained steady as she spoke. She told us that seeing the Sentinels changed how she understood duty, that it wasn't just about the missions or the combat, but about representing something larger than ourselves, something worth perfect dedication. She reached into a pocket and withdrew a small, worn notebook. This was hers. She kept a journal. There's an entry after her Arlington visit that I thought you should see. The journal entry, dated 14 months earlier, read, "Watched the tomb guards today, perfect in every movement, every detail of their uniform, every step. They stand watch in blizzards, hurricanes, heat waves, no excuses, no compromises. They guard the nameless with the same dedication as if they knew each one personally. That's the standard, not just for soldiers, but for citizens, to recognize what deserves our complete respect, and to give it without reservation, without excuses, without counting the cost. If I can serve with a fraction of that dedication, I'll have done something worthwhile." Winters read the words twice, then carefully returned the journal to Reyes. "Thank you for sharing this," he said simply. The knowledge that PFC Morales had found such meaning in the Sentinel's watch added yet another dimension to the connection between her journey and his duty. "There's something else," Reyes added. "Our unit is deploying again next month. We've adopted a new tradition based on what happened after Jess came home. Before every mission, no matter how urgent, we take 21 seconds of silence, standing still to remember why we serve and what truly matters." This quiet revelation that the ripples from that airport standstill had reached forward deployed troops and influenced their pre-mission rituals illustrated how deeply the principles of dignity and respect had resonated throughout the military community and beyond. As spring arrived in Washington, bringing cherry blossoms and increasing numbers of visitors to Arlington, Winters found himself approaching the conclusion of his service as a Sentinel. After 3 years of guarding the unknown soldiers with perfect dedication, he would soon pass that sacred duty to the next generation of guards. Before his assignment ended, however, there was one final, significant ceremony. The tomb of the unknown soldier plaza was being rededicated following renovations, and a time capsule would be sealed within the structure to be opened 50 years in the future. Military leadership had selected items representing the enduring values of service and sacrifice to be included in this capsule. Among them was a sealed letter from the Morales family, PFC Jessica's original journal, and a photograph taken at Reagan National Airport showing the terminal at a standstill as her flag-draped transfer case passed through. The day before the ceremony, Winters received permission for a private moment at the tomb after hours. In the gathering dusk, with only fellow Sentinels present, he placed Jessica's compass alongside his own contribution to the time capsule, a handwritten account of what had transpired at the airport, and how a single moment of standing firm for dignity had rippled outward to touch countless lives. As he carefully positioned these items in the container that would remain sealed for half a century, Winters reflected on the broader meaning of his experience. What had begun as a routine escort duty had evolved into a powerful reminder that, beneath the visible divisions of American society, lay shared values strong enough to unite strangers in spontaneous reverence. The compass that had guided PFC Morales in life would now guide future generations, a symbol of finding true north. In a world often pulled in contradictory directions, the account of the airport standstill would remind those who opened the time capsule decades hence that even in challenging times, the capacity for unity through respect remained an essential part of the national character. The rededication ceremony, the following day, brought together military leaders, elected officials, veterans organizations, and citizens from across the country. Among them were many who had been part of the Morales journey, the Morales family themselves, Patricia Lawson and Trevor Phillips from the airport, Colonel Harrington, Bernard Keller, and representatives from each community that had lined the route to Clearwater. As the time capsule was officially sealed, the presiding general explained its significance. 50 years from now, Americans yet unborn will open this capsule and discover what we valued enough to preserve for them. They will find not just artifacts of our time, but testament to principles that transcend time: duty, honor, respect, and the profound unity possible when we recognize our shared humanity. The ceremony concluded with the guard relief, the ancient ritual that had continued uninterrupted since 1937 through wars, natural disasters, and national crises. As the new Sentinel took his post, executing each movement with flawless precision, visitors fell silent without prompting. The clicking of cameras ceased. Conversations paused. For those sacred moments, differences of politics, religion, and background were set aside in recognition of something that united rather than divided. In that silence, standing among those who had been part of this remarkable journey, Staff Sergeant Michael Winters recognized the most important lesson of the past 6 months, that in a world often fixated on conflict and division, the capacity for unity remained alive. It required only the courage to stand firm for the principles of dignity and respect, even when doing so meant standing still while others rushed forward. 2 weeks later, as Winters completed his final shift as a tomb guard, he performed each step, each movement, each precise ritual with the same perfect dedication he had shown on his first day. Though his assignment was ending, the values it represented would continue to guide his life and influence others through the lasting impact of the Morales moment. As he executed his final salute, a gesture performed countless times for the unknown soldiers, he found himself also honoring PFC Jessica Morales and the profound legacy she had created through her life, her service, and her journey home. Because some journeys change not just those who undertake them, but all who witness them with open hearts. Some moments of standing still alter our understanding of what truly deserves our reverence, and some principles of dignity and respect prove powerful enough to unite us across all that might otherwise divide us. If this story moved you, remember that you need not wear a uniform to stand for what matters. In your daily life, in moments large and small, you have the power to recognize what deserves reverence and to give it without reservation. Because in a world that rarely slows down, sometimes the most powerful choice is simply to stand still, to pause, to honor, to respect. The next time you encounter someone in uniform, or pass a memorial, or hear of a fallen hero coming home, take 21 seconds to stand still in honor. It costs nothing, yet in that small gesture, you connect to something profound, the enduring values that remind us, despite our differences, of all we share. Subscribe if you believe in the power of respect to unite us, and share this story, to inspire others to stand still for what truly matters. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.